Hello, my name's Julia Mennell, and this is a 20-minute video to help coaches to deal with coaching chemistry sessions, something that isn't often brought up in coach training and is something that most of us make up as we go along. They can be quite soul destroying when you do quite a lot of them and don't get anywhere. So this video will give you some tips and techniques that will help, and it's based on my 20 odd years of being a coach and the challenges of chemistry sessions that a lot of coaches have brought to my supervision. And also recently I did this as a session for a group of coaches, so some of the things that they talked about have been incorporated in this too, so it's just my opinion. So let's have a think about what this video will give you first of all. So we'll have a look at what we mean by the term chemistry session, because it's something we all use, but where has that come from and why do we use it? The video will give you some key tips on making the best of chemistry sessions so that you are more likely to gain clients from them, but also to let go of the ones that don't give you any success. I'll provide you with a suggested process for a successful chemistry session, so you'll have that to work through, and also along the way help you to consider whether chemistry sessions need to be different with a direct client versus when you're doing associate work. I think the video will give you some reassurance about when coaches don't want to work with you and how to handle those feelings. And there are some practical how-tos of when you realise that you can't work with a particular coachee or you don't want to work with them, and how you might deal with that. So let's have a think about what we call these. So chemistry session is probably the main term that most coaches use. When I ask coaches about this, this is the list that they came up with. So you've got things like discovery session, rapport meeting, initial session, introductory, exploratory. You may have a different one. And the question's an important one, because does it actually matter what we call them? I think it probably does, because does the client know what we're talking about, or is this just coach jargon that we use? So does a particular term set up an expectation? Is the term chemistry helpful? Does it sound like you're going on a date? And could the client feel like they're being assessed? And in actual fact, we often feel like we're being assessed on these sessions as well. So that's in the mix too. I think if you are going to call them chemistry sessions, as we'll see when we look at the sort of process of them and the setup, you need to be clear about what this actually is, so your client understands what you're talking about and what that session will look like, so that they don't have an expectation that this is the coaching proper, that you are actually going straight into session one, that this is just about fact finding really, and seeking information about each other. So on that basis, let's have a look at a sort of a process. I've taken this from a coach, Gladina McMahon. So if you want to look up the original article, it'll still be on the internet. And these are really sort of the basics. So she suggests that you start off first of all with the chemistry session is thinking about what they know about coaching and asking them. Although they may say that they want you to start, it's always a good idea to get clients to start talking first. It's a bit like in an interview situation. They might be a little bit nervous, but actually talking about themselves helps them to settle. And at the end of the day, they should be talking more than you're talking on a chemistry session, because this is about them starting to verbalise what they may want to use the coaching for, rather than you selling and marketing yourself. So find out what they know about coaching, because we don't necessarily know what they've been told. So if they've been encouraged to find a coach via a line manager or a HR manager, or it's come via associate work, we don't necessarily know what they've been briefed on. And it might not necessarily be what you would want them to be briefed on. So they may have come with all sorts of different thoughts and ideas. So it's good to check that out first of all. Gladina McMahon, and I agree with this, says use your coaching skills actually in the session itself. So you're not actually coaching them. So don't get pulled into coaching by accident, because you don't have a contract with them, so it's not ethical. But you can actually use the skills of coaching. So you can ask questions, you can reflect, paraphrase, summarize, and that will help you to establish what their objectives are, will help them to pull some of that out. Because as we know, clients will sometimes show up on a chemistry session and they don't always actually know what they want. So putting it into words is sometimes difficult. It means then you are showing almost in action what you can do. And you'd be surprised how often coaches say things started to shift even from that moment. Just somebody hearing them and holding the mirror up and framing what they could possibly work on really started to help them right from the first minute. You know, that can happen. So it gives them a flavour of what it will be like to work with you. I suggest also you have a range of topics and examples of clients to hand, because you and I know that it doesn't always figure that you have to have worked on in a particular sector or with a particular client to be able to coach them, but the client often wants to hear that. So rather than relying on memory, if you've got a list with you, you can give them some examples to provide reassurance and credibility, of course, for them. So write down and practice what you want to say, so you're getting clear and comfortable with your offer, and you don't feel then that you are waffling with them. And at the end, irrespective of which way it goes, depending on what they've talked about, you may want to add value by sending them an article or a web link or something. And even if they don't come back to you, you're not successful in gaining the work, it's created a nice networking opportunity. And you never know who they're going to talk to. So even if they don't work with you, they may recommend you to somebody else. So it's good from a professional point of view to leave on a positive note. So those are Gladina's sort of top tips. In terms of a process, starting from the beginning through to the end of the coaching chemistry session, this is my suggested process. And normally, I think for most people, the inquiry for coaching comes through via email. So if that is the case, then that's great, because you can arrange the logistics like the date and the time, whether you're going to do it online, on the phone, or in person. I like to do my chemistry meetings actually on the phone, which means I can write notes. Whereas if I'm doing a Zoom call, for instance, it feels more like a formal session. The other thing to think about is how's this person come to you? Is this a referral from somewhere, a direct client? Is it associate work? Because are you being paid for this? And that will help you to determine how long really should spend on chemistry sessions. by and large, you're often not paid for this. And one of my top tips also will be that sometimes associate consultancies do not think about chemistry meetings, and they will book a client in with you right from session one. So you are essentially doing the chemistry session in session one, which is not ideal, because then if you find out in that session one something that precludes you from working with them, then that's disappointing for the client in terms of their expectations. Whereas at least with a chemistry meeting, you are checking a lot of things out with them, and we'll talk about that later. So if you have an associate company who you're working for who do not suggest a chemistry meeting, there's nothing to stop you going ahead and doing them yourself. Obviously, you can check that with them, but they wouldn't have a problem if they're not paying for them. You may find that actually that works better for you and it feels better. It feels better for the client. It feels more ethical, rather than being bumped into doing a session with somebody straight away. The average that most coaches spend on chemistry sessions is between 30 and 40 minutes. Any longer than that, and it's like, you're giving your time away. And if you're doing a lot of them and then you don't get the gig, that can when it really starts to be soul destroying. So be clear in your communication, same as what Gladina said in the previous slide. Be clear in your communication of the purpose of the chemistry session so that they understand the boundaries. So you can put that into your email when you are setting it up, so that they understand that this is not going to be a coaching session proper. It's just fact finding. It's just finding out a bit about them. They can find out about you, and it's scoping, basically. You may want to send out some information about you beforehand, so that they've got that there to read, and maybe that answers some of the basic questions, and then that doesn't take up the time. And it means that if they've read that beforehand, you can just fill in the gaps. I would also suggest that you verbalise your confidentiality at the start of the chemistry session as well, because even though you might not be working with them in the future, you are obtaining data from them at that moment. And if you're making notes and you tell them that you're making notes and you're being clear about those notes, then you need to say to them what happens to those notes afterwards. So I say to my clients, if we end up not working together, then these notes will be destroyed. If we do, they become part of your file, and it's obviously information. You don't need to keep them if you're not working with them. This is a good time also to reiterate that they've got no obligation to work with you, and that you are very keen for them to find the right coach, and that the fit in a coaching relationship is much more important than any other thing, really. It means then that they don't feel under pressure, that you are okay with that. So outline a suggested structure for the conversation, and how it might go, and say, I suggest 30 minutes. And then you can just listen, allow them to talk, and listen for any specifics that they want to get from the session, and start to pull out things that you think this is what they want to be working on in the coaching. As I said before, try to get them to start speaking first, okay, because it's more important to hear what they've got to say rather than what you want to tell them. I would also recommend starting big picture. So clients tend to sort of dive into the detail of their problems, whereas it's better actually to just start pulling them back a little bit and see the context in which all of this might sit. So, in an executive coaching capacity, when you're working with employees in a work-based contract, then, why are they working where they're working? How did they come to be in that profession? So that you can see the picture, and then hone down to the issues that have led them to look for coaching in the first place. Obviously, nearer the end, you need to give them an opportunity to answer some questions, fill in any gaps. My experience is some clients have really thought about this and they come with lots of questions. Some don't come with any at all. So finishing it off is about giving them the option to reflect so that they don't feel that they have to say here and now whether they want to work with you. So give them that opt-out, say to them you would recommend they talk to other coaches. It looks relaxed, it looks professional, it looks like you are not desperately trying to make them sign on the dotted line. However, if they are keen, and some clients will say straight away that they want to work with you, and if you want to work with them, then get a date in the diary, get that commitment, arrange a first session, and then also have a conversation about what else needs to happen, who else needs to be involved in this, are there other stakeholders, what other contracting needs to be done, depending if this is going through a company, and also what pre-coaching work you'd like them to complete before the first session. So that can all be done at the end. Of course, if they want to work with you and you've come across something that you think may preclude you from working with them, then you would need to say that at the end. It's probably better to do it there and then rather than for you to sign off and then go back to them later. So we'll pick that up next. Okay, so that's a suggested process of, from the start of the chemistry session all the way through. So at the end of the chemistry session, what if you've discovered that you don't want to work with them for whatever reason, or you can't work with them, something's occurred that you've thought, oh, it's not a good idea if I get into a relationship with these people. And what if they don't want to work with you? So let's take one at a time. So what if you don't want to work with them and you can't work with them? Now you might be thinking, well, what would that be? And particularly when you are new, you're trying to get clients, you may not necessarily see that there are some people that it's not a good idea to work with. There's a couple of blogs on my website called Can't Coach, Won't Coach that looks at the people who you shouldn't work with, like the under 18s, people who you already know. But there's often a grey line with that, because in networking terms, we are often getting referrals from people who we know via 6 degrees of separation. So that can be tricky at times, and we can all rationalise why it's okay to work with somebody. I think the chemistry session is a brilliant time to work out whether a client is coachable, because sometimes they may have health and well-being issues that have not necessarily been flagged, particularly if they've been encouraged by an organisation. And a lot of the time, coaching's got less stigma attached to it than counselling. And so people are often come to coaching when actually they might be better off going to therapy. So again, when you're asking questions in that sort of bigger picture, it's useful to find out things like this about their health and well-being, like if they had counselling before. That's always useful anyway, to find out whether they know the difference. And you might be restricting on how much you want to ask them in a chemistry session. And you may find out more about them in session 1 that may preclude you working with them. But the more you find out about them at the chemistry session, the better you are able to think about, are they coachable at this time? And I've underlined at this time because, we all might have scenarios where this isn't a really good time to be starting coaching. That, they could have just, the husband's only left them last week, or, they've recently had quite a serious bereavement. There could be all sorts of things going on in the background that means that they wouldn't be, in the right place to have coaching. So that might be something to talk about. There also might be a boundary issue or a conflict of interest. And sometimes those things don't always come in the obvious way. So a coach said that she'd got an email from this particular client, and the email address had got the group name of the company. But until she spoke to the client, she didn't realise who the client actually worked for. And it was a subsidiary of the group. And unfortunately, the subsidiary was a company that the coach really didn't want to work with. It was in a sector that she wasn't comfortable with. So again, this is something to think about for yourselves. Is, are there organisations you wouldn't work with, irrespective of who it was? So, some people have issues with tobacco industry or gambling industry, all these sorts of things to think about, so that you are not necessarily put on the spot. Now, in this scenario, unfortunately, it was associate work, and the associate company had not told the coach what the actual company name was. So back to that thing again, is trying to get more information out of the associate company before going into a chemistry session is helpful. There might just be a conflict of interest. You might find that actually it's a company you used to work for, or you've got a relative who works there, or a friend, or whatever, or you discover their manager. I had a scenario where I got right to the end of the chemistry session, and I forgot to ask, where did you find out about me? And the client said her father was a coach. And as soon as she said his name, I knew who he was, because she's a woman, she had a different name to him. And I knew I couldn't work with her because of that. So that was something to say at the end. And that's difficult. It says, when do you say that, and what do you say? And there's nothing wrong in saying something's arisen that wasn't there right at the beginning when we were talking, and you just told me about X, and this is the reason why I can't work with you. And making sure that actually then you help your client to find an alternative, that you're not just sort of leaving them high and dry, that they've got somewhere to go. So refer them on to another coach, or if it's agreed associate work, that you'll go back to the associate company to tell them that you won't be working with this particular client, and then hopefully they will find somebody else for the client. So it's about you being ethical and professional. You are the one that knows these things. Your client won't necessarily see that there's an ethical issue, because they're not the expert in the room. You are. So that brings us to the next one, which is, what if they don't want to work with you? Now, the thing is, sometimes you don't necessarily find out that they don't want to work with you. They may say, oh, I'll email you and let you know, and then you don't hear from them. And it's, how long do you wait? Do you get in touch? Do you just leave it? And I know I've had lots of coaches in supervision talking about this, and about how much to chase clients. Sometimes a little nudge email is helpful, or a phone call, but there does come a point where you have to say, this doesn't look professional. There's no dignity in chasing somebody who, if they wanted to work with you, they know where you are and they could have got back to you. So I know that's really difficult when you want the work, particularly if you've liked them and you feel quite sad and that they've not come back to you. So there comes a time when you do have to let that go. You may find that sometimes in the chemistry session you get a feeling that they don't want to work with you. So, like we said before, leave it so that you are helping them to say that without any awkwardness. You're making it easy for them by saying, it's really helpful for people to talk to a variety of coaches, so that the fit is really important. So you're under no pressure to get back to me. It'd be really lovely to hear from you, but that's fine if you don't. And live with that. Now, sometimes it's useful to get feedback. So, for instance, if it's done through an associate company, they may be able to get feedback about why you didn't get the gig. And if you're up against other coaches, sometimes there isn't any feedback really. There wasn't anything that you could have said or done. And sometimes there is, which means you can tweak your process. Sometimes it was just that factor X, and they liked to work with somebody more than you. But because coaching is personal, we can take it personally. But it's more important that the client gets who they need. And then that final point speaks to that, because sometimes you are in a beauty parade with other coaches, and there is that element of competition, feeling assessed. So there's another blog on my website called Beauty Parades for Coaches, and handling those, because those are the scenarios where a client is speaking to 2 or 3 coaches. They've perhaps been given paper or online profiles, and they are speaking to a number of coaches before you and after you. That always feels quite tough. And I know when I've been in situations like that, it's difficult. You look at the other coaches and you're thinking, well, what have they got that I haven't got? And it's not personal that way. And sometimes you might be in one of these in-person beauty parades where all the coaches are together, and people select them in a meeting, which can also be quite tough. So it's a numbers game, chemistry sessions. You will get some, and there were some that you won't get. And the ones that you don't get are probably the ones that you weren't meant to get, and they weren't necessarily the right client for you. So that brings us to the end of the session. We talked about some tips and techniques, the process, what to do if you can't or don't want to work with a client. And my website is Spark Coaching and Training. So the blogs that I mentioned previously, you can go on there and check those out. And there are lots of other blogs and information on there for coaches. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.